Howdy folks, and welcome back to Hive Prometheus. I wanted to go ahead and go over some of the top armies from this past weekend and from the last 3 weeks worth of data. I went ahead and took some of the data from 40kmetamonday.com. I just collated them based on win rate and performance in previous tournaments this week. And I put them into sort of two different tiers. Tier 1 for armies that were seeing top 5 placements or winning GTs. And then tier 2 for things that are winning RTTs or placing very highly in GTs. And the reason I'm going over this is if you are playing Tyranids and you're a diehard like I am, if you're going to try to go ahead and podium with a list going through an RTT or GT, you need to have in mind that your list is going to be going into these armies more often than not. So you have to be able to tech into and beat these armies either on the primary or have units that are efficient into profiles that those armies normally take. So let's go ahead and shoot over to a list of those armies divided into those two tiers. Alright, so looking at Tier 1, we definitely saw Custodes this weekend come out in force. They got a huge glow up. You're probably going to be seeing them a lot more often now. I, up to this point, have only had one game against Custodes, but that will probably change. In my experience, if you were able to play defensively and shoot them from a distance and whittle them down to a point that you could go in with any melee, that was the way I could go about it. If you're playing Tyranids, you're probably going to have to move block one side of the board and deal with one or two squads as you chew through them. They just have very tough bodies. They're not necessarily point efficient. They just have lots of overlapping stacks of defensive bonuses like -1 to wound, the 4-up against mortals, and -1 damage. They also have the ability to get fights first on Trajan's squad and potentially another squad. They are definitely an anti-melee meta army. That's kind of the reason why you see some of the other Tier 2 armies dropping down to Tier 2, like Orcs, Drukhari, Blood Angels, and in some capacity, some melee from Marines. Sisters, you're still seeing a very high percentage win rate. I think a lot of people who are originally playing Eldar have now switched over to playing Sisters and Necrons, and that's why we see them in Tier 1 with a lot of high placements and wins. Black Templars still have Sword Brethren who avoided any nerf. They are incredibly efficient damage-wise when it comes to melee. I think the only reason they can't punch up too much into Custodes is because of the -1 damage on their 2 damage weapons. Death Guard, now that they have the ability with Mortarian's Aura to ignore all modifiers, including half damage, -1 damage, they can tech into hurting Necrons, especially Catans. So anything in here, this is kind of the scrap tier. You know, everybody is kind of vying for that top position. Tier 2, you see a multitude of units kind of coming out. You still have different detachments from Marines doing very well. Eldar has dropped down a little bit. They're at about a 49 to a 51% win rate. Still acceptable for where they should be after 4 or 5 nerfs. Orcs are still doing very well. They're about 50% even. Drukhari are about 49. They're doing very well into a majority of the armies at Tier 2, but against tankier armies that take away at least 1 damage or reduce their weapon skill like Death Guard, Necrons, or Custodes, who also Necrons can just have better movement. With Hypercrypt, they seem to fall off. Blood Angels, like I said, can punch into anything here and just murder anything they touch. Not necessarily happening as much in here because of interrupts, fights first, Miracle Dice, or very defensive profiles. Leagues of Votann are shifting away from using the smaller transports. They're now going to 2 Hecaton Land Fortress lists. They are extremely tough. I mean, I think they have permanent armor contempt and their toughness 12, so if you don't have something that can tech into lethal hits, you probably would want to take a Tyranid or 2 at this point just to punch into Chaos Demons and Chaos Knights. Chaos Space Marines are still bringing some Forge Fiends, but in general, a lot of the armies that we're looking at here are melee threats. Tyranids as a whole don't have a melee threat as efficient as Orcs, Blood Angels, Black Templars, Custodes. So we're going to be looking at things that are going to be much more shooting efficient. So I think that the lists that are probably going to come out as anti-Tier 1 and Tier 2 tier armies are going to be Synaptic Nexus and Invasion Fleet. That's not really anything new to us. However, I think we're just going to see a larger importance on that. Now, whether or not you play on WTC or American Leviathan type deployments with player placed, WTC is definitely more inclined to an infantry-based meta. So maybe you'll see more Vanguard play out of there, but that is to be seen. One other thing I wanted to mention there is Unending Swarm does have a good ability to move block and play the primary and secondary game very well. That might be the way to go against Custodes. However, I don't know if they have enough toughness overall to weather the number of bolter shots and melee attacks from other armies like Blood Angels, Black Templars, Drukhari. I believe that they're just going to be able to chew through whatever they want to go into. If we're looking at efficient shooting profile units, Exocrines, Tyranifexes. Tyranifexes specifically for their acid sprays or rupture effects. I think you're going to see either 1 and 1 or 2 and 2 depending on the list. If you're running Vanguard, you're probably running 2 rupture effects because you need something that can punch in heavy armor, do chip damage, so then you can go and delete something with those devastating wounds. If you're playing something that doesn't have a melee threat in general, you're probably going to see 1 and 1 rupture effects, acid effects, or in some situations where you have a much heavier infantry meta, just so that you can get an Overwatch threat and seal on the board, you might see a double acid effects. I do think that 2 to 3 Exocrines and 1 to 2 Tyranifexes is going to help a lot going forward. That's a lot of points. Getting those models these days can be a little more difficult. Maliceptors are still very good for their points. They are a bit more than an Exocrine for a 35-point premium over the 135 points for an Exocrine, but it comes with toughness 11 and a 4-up invuln. Having said that, it sounds like Monster Mash seems to skew slightly better into Custodes, perhaps if you can weather the number of attacks that they have in melee or a fight's first ability. Trajan's attacks are strength 10, and he can have 12 of them when he cracks his Moment Shackle once per game. So between that and the Custodes, if you have something of T10 or higher, that gives you your best potential defensive bonus against it. Invasion Fleet also allows you to get that 5-up Feel No Pain. Gives you a roughly 33% increased wounds compared to the damage you would normally take. All things considered, I think Invasion still has sort of that top slot for our defensiveness and our offensive prowess, whether or not we need lethal hits or sustained hits against infantry or vehicles. Synaptic Nexus is still a highly defensive detachment, and allowing Custodes or Blood Angels or other things to come to the midfield and us kind of pick and choose our targets with Irresistible Will still looks very good, but it's a bit more of a defensive detachment, and it requires a slightly higher degree of skill to pilot. Anyway, thanks everybody if you made it to this point in the video. I just want to thank all the new subscribers and the people liking the videos. It's really helped the channel grow. I'm really surprised at the growth of the channel, and I'm really happy to see it. So I will continue to try to keep serving you in the purpose of making you enjoy this game more, and I hope to see you again next time on Hive Fleet Prometheus.